3,000 miles away in Windsor, Catherine was experiencing her own moment of reflection. She sat in the nursery that had once belonged to all three of her children, now primarily Lilibet's domain when they visited, though the youngest Cambridge rarely had reason to use it anymore. The room remained decorated with the same whimsical wallpaper and soft furnishings that had comforted George during his earliest years, and now served as a quiet retreat where she could think without interruption. The Princess of Wales had been working late into the evening on preparations for her upcoming Early Childhood Development Summit, reviewing research papers and program proposals that would shape policy for years to come. The work fulfilled her deeply, connecting her personal experience as a mother with her public role in a way that felt both meaningful and authentic. Yet tonight, surrounded by reminders of her children's younger years, her thoughts kept drifting to family members who were absent from their lives. William found her there an hour later, papers spread across the small desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she made notes in the margins of a particularly dense research study. He knocked gently on the doorframe to announce his presence, not wanting to startle her from her concentration. "The children are finally asleep," he said, settling into the comfortable armchair where Catherine had spent countless hours nursing babies and reading bedtime stories. George tried to negotiate for just one more chapter of his adventure book, and Charlotte insisted she needed to rearrange her stuffed animals for optimal sleeping positions. Catherine smiled, setting down her pen and removing her glasses. "And Louis?" Out like a light the moment his head hit the pillow. All that energy from building snow forts finally caught up with him. William studied his wife's expression, noting the thoughtful melancholy that seemed to have settled over her features. "What's on your mind? You've been quiet since dinner." Catherine leaned back in her chair, her gaze moving to the window where snow was beginning to fall in gentle flakes. "I was reading about a literacy program in California today, one that focuses on providing books to children in underserved communities. The approach was remarkably similar to some of the initiatives we've been developing here." She paused, choosing her words carefully. William had become skilled at reading the subtle shifts in his wife's moods, and he sensed there was more to this conversation than professional interest in international charitable programs. "It made me think about Meghan's work in education," Catherine continued quietly. "Before everything became so complicated between us, we used to talk about children's literacy quite often. She had such passionate ideas about making reading accessible to every child, regardless of their circumstances." William felt his shoulders tense slightly, the way they always did when conversation turned to his brother and sister-in-law. The pain of their fractured relationship was still raw, complicated by years of misunderstandings, media pressure, and words that couldn't be taken back. Yet he also recognized the genuine sadness in his wife's voice, the grief she carried for relationships that had once brought her joy. "I know you miss them," he said gently. "I miss them too, even if it's difficult to admit." Catherine turned to look at him, grateful for his understanding. "It's particularly hard during Christmas. I find myself wondering about Archie and Lilibet, whether they're excited about Father Christmas, what kinds of traditions Harry and Meghan are creating for them in California." She stood up and moved to the window, watching the snow accumulate on the windowsill. "George asked me yesterday if his cousin Archie celebrates Christmas the same way we do. I didn't know how to answer him." William joined her at the window, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Their children were aware of their American cousins primarily through photographs and occasional video calls that had become increasingly rare. The complexity of adult relationships shouldn't affect children's connections to family, yet the reality was that it inevitably did. "Perhaps," William said carefully, "we could find a way to let the children connect without getting caught up in everything else." Catherine nodded, her mind beginning to work through possibilities. "I've been thinking about that literacy program I read about today. What if there was a way to channel our shared values into something meaningful, something that could benefit children while also creating a bridge between our families?" The idea that had been germinating in her mind since reading the article began to take more concrete form. Catherine had always believed that children's welfare transcended political and personal divisions. Her work in early childhood development had taught her that the most effective programs often resulted from collaboration between passionate advocates, regardless of their other differences. Meghan has such expertise in this area, Catherine continued, her voice growing more animated. Her background in advocacy, her understanding of American charitable systems, her genuine passion for education. If we could find a way to work together, even from a distance, we might create something truly impactful. William listened thoughtfully, recognizing the hope in his wife's voice. He had watched her struggle with the loss of what had begun as a genuine friendship with Meghan, two women who shared similar values and experiences navigating life in the public eye. The personal had become political in ways that neither had anticipated, but the foundation of shared caring remained. "What are you envisioning?" he asked. Catherine moved away from the window and began pacing, her mind racing with possibilities. A joint initiative focused on Christmas literacy programs, something that operates simultaneously in the UK and the US, that encourages communities to come together around providing books to children who need them most. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through notes she had made earlier. There are so many children who won't receive books for Christmas, who don't have access to the kind of rich literary environment that we take for granted with George, Charlotte, and Louis. What if we created a program that changed that? William could see his wife's passion building, the same energy that drove her most successful charitable initiatives. "You're thinking about reaching out to them." "I'm thinking about putting children first," Catherine replied firmly. "About creating something meaningful that reflects our shared values, regardless of our personal complications." The next morning, Catherine found herself in her private office earlier than usual, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as she researched existing literacy programs and considered how a transatlantic collaboration might work. The snow had continued falling through the night, creating a pristine white landscape that felt full of possibility and fresh starts. Her assistant knocked and entered with the morning briefings, but Catherine found herself unable to concentrate on the usual array of meeting preparations and correspondence reviews. Instead, she kept returning to websites for American literacy charities, studying their approaches, and wondering how they might align with British initiatives she supported. At precisely 10 o'clock, her phone rang with an unexpected call. Catherine glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip slightly when she saw the California number she recognized but hadn't heard from in months. For a moment, she hesitated, uncertain whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. Then, thinking of her children's questions about their cousins and her own conviction that family connections mattered more than adult complications, she answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Meghan," she said quietly, her voice carefully neutral but not unwelcoming. The conversation that followed was tentative at first, both women careful not to venture into territory that might reignite old tensions. Meghan spoke about her children, about Christmas preparations, about the literacy work she had been developing in California. Catherine shared similar updates about her family and her early childhood initiatives. Gradually, as they discovered they were both working on remarkably similar Christmas literacy programs, the conversation began to flow more naturally. They found themselves finishing each other's sentences, building on each other's ideas with the kind of collaborative energy that had characterized their friendship in earlier, simpler times. "What if," Meghan said finally, her voice filled with cautious hope, "we actually did this together? What if we created something that could make a real difference for children on both sides of the Atlantic?" Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of possibility and risk in equal measure. "I think," she said slowly, "that might be exactly what Christmas is supposed to be about." The December air in Montecito carried the scent of eucalyptus and ocean salt as Prince Harry stood on the balcony of his California home, watching his children play in the garden below. Archie was chasing butterflies while Lilibet toddled after him, her laughter echoing across the manicured lawn. The scene should have filled him with pure joy, but, instead, Harry felt a familiar tug of melancholy that always seemed to surface during the holiday season. Meghan emerged from the house carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her footsteps soft on the wooden deck. She handed one to Harry and settled beside him on the outdoor sofa, studying his thoughtful expression with the intuitive understanding that had drawn them together years ago. "You're thinking about them again," she said gently, not needing to specify who them referred to. The invisible thread that connected Harry to his family across the ocean seemed to tighten during Christmas, despite the geographical and emotional distance that had grown between them since their departure from royal duties. Harry nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. I keep wondering what George, Charlotte, and Louis are doing right now. Whether they're excited about Christmas, what they've asked Father Christmas for this year. His voice carried a wistfulness that made Meghan's heart ache for him. The relationship between the two couples had been strained for years, with media speculation and family tensions creating an almost insurmountable chasm. Public appearances together had become rare, and private communication had dwindled to formal exchanges through intermediaries. Yet beneath the surface, both Harry and Meghan carried genuine affection for William and Kate, particularly for their children who were growing up an ocean away. Meghan took a sip of her coffee, watching a hummingbird hover near the jasmine flowers. What if we reached out, she suggested quietly. Not through the usual channels, not with any agenda. Just as family. Harry turned to look at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. Given everything that had happened, everything that had been said and written, the idea seemed both impossible and desperately appealing. Do you think they'd want to hear from us? I think, Meghan said carefully, that underneath all the complexity, Kate is a mother who loves her children, just like I love ours. And mothers understand the importance of family connections, even when the adults are struggling to find their way. That evening, after the children were asleep, Harry and Meghan sat together in their living room, surrounded by the warm glow of Christmas lights they had strung around the windows. The house felt peaceful, filled with the kind of quiet contentment that came from being truly at home. Yet Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from their celebration. Meghan pulled out her phone and began scrolling through old photos, stopping at images from previous Christmases when the families had been together. There was one of Harry and William building a snowman with George, both brothers laughing as the wobbly creation threatened to topple over. Another showed Kate and Meghan watching the children open presents, their faces reflecting the universal joy that comes from seeing little ones discover magic. Look at this one, Meghan said, showing Harry a picture of all the cousins together during what would be their last shared Christmas. Archie was just a baby then, cradled in Kate's arms while George and Charlotte showed him a colorful toy. The image captured a moment of pure family harmony that seemed almost impossible to believe had existed. Harry studied the photo for a long moment, his expression softening. They were so good with Archie, he remembered. George was so gentle, and Charlotte kept wanting to help feed him. And Kate, Meghan added with a small smile. She had that maternal instinct that transcended everything else. She didn't see controversy or media drama when she looked at our son. She just saw a baby who was part of the family. The idea that had been forming in Meghan's mind began to take more concrete shape. She had been thinking about it for weeks, actually, ever since she had seen a news article about a charity event Kate had organized for underprivileged children. The article had mentioned how the Princess of Wales had personally selected books to give to each child, ensuring that every gift was thoughtfully chosen rather than simply distributed in bulk. It had reminded Meghan of her own passion for literacy and children's education, causes that had driven much of her charitable work both before and after joining the royal family. Despite their differences, despite the complicated history between them, she and Kate shared fundamental values about nurturing young minds and creating opportunities for children to thrive. What if we did something meaningful? Meghan suggested, her voice growing more animated as the idea crystallized. Not a grand gesture, not something that would attract media attention, but something genuine, something that honors what we both care about. Harry set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. What are you thinking? Meghan stood up and began pacing, her mind racing with possibilities. Kate has been working so much with early childhood development, with literacy programs. And you know how passionate I am about education and children's books. What if we created something together, even if we're apart? What if we found a way to combine our efforts for something bigger than our personal situation? The more she spoke, the more excited she became. This wasn't about reconciliation or public relations. This was about channeling their shared love for their children and their commitment to helping other children into something meaningful and lasting. Harry watched his wife's enthusiasm with growing interest. He could see the genuine motivation behind her words, the desire to bridge not just their family divide, but to create something positive in the world. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had drawn him to her in the first place, her ability to see beyond immediate problems to larger possibilities. But how? He asked practically. Given everything that's happened, given how careful they have to be about any public associations. Meghan paused in her pacing, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. What if we made it about the children? Not about us, not about politics or royal protocol, but genuinely about making Christmas better for kids who need it most. She returned to sit beside him, her eyes bright with possibility. We could create a joint initiative, a Christmas book drive for children in need. Something that operates in both the UK and the US. Something that brings communities together around the simple act of giving children access to stories and imagination. Harry felt a flutter of hope in his chest, the first genuine excitement he had felt about potentially reconnecting with his family in years. The beauty of Meghan's idea was its simplicity and its focus on what truly mattered to all of them regardless of their personal complications. We could call it something like Christmas Stories, Meghan continued, her voice soft but filled with conviction. A program that encourages families to donate new books, that partners with local organizations to distribute them to children who might not otherwise receive gifts, that celebrates the magic of reading and storytelling during the holiday season. As they sat together in the gentle glow of their Christmas lights, both Harry and Meghan felt the stirring of something that had been dormant for too long. It was the possibility of healing, not just between families, but within their own hearts. The possibility of creating something beautiful from the ashes of painful division.